There's a lot to love in a game like Omori. It's an incredibly charming game with a fun world, likable characters, and a very gripping story. Many praise its unique spin on the RPG format, taking things like characters interacting and their emotions and turning them into actual gameplay elements during battle. What the game is mostly known for, however, is its subversive storytelling, taking what appears to be a very childlike and safe world and then revealing its role in a much darker story. Figuring out what that story is much of what the game focuses on, and is generally the game's primary plot device, but today I want to focus on something else the story presents. Something the game's themes generally revolve around, but doesn't get much light shed on it. Nostalgia. While I won't go into huge spoilers, there are some things I need to mention for the full video to make sense, some of those things taking place around the middle of the game or so mild spoiler warnings are ahead. For those who haven't played Omori before, the game initially focuses on a boy named Omori. You start off by going on some fun adventures with your friends in a dreamlike world, full of wacky but fun characters. Here, you're introduced to Kel, Aubrey, Hiro, Marie, and Basil, the first three of which make up your party in and out of battle throughout most of the game. Meanwhile, Marie and Basil kinda do their own thing. All of these characters are very important, but I'll go into more detail on them later. Things get a little rough after a game of hide and seek, but after that you're off to Basil's house. On the way though, Aubrey and Kel get into a bit of a fight, as they often do, and they end up knocking over Basil and his photo album, with some of the pictures falling out. While picking them back up though inside, Basil notices something strange about one of the photos, and then... Soon after, you find yourself awake in a very dark room. Not only that, but you notice you're not controlling Omori anymore, but rather someone named Sunny. Again, mild spoilers here, but this is important to mention to understand the video fully. Not too long into the game, you can start to piece together where this world and this one fit together. The place you began the game in is a place known as Headspace, a dream world where you get to go on fun adventures with your friends all the time, meet fun characters, have big battles, the works. Meanwhile, this world is the real world, a suburban town called Faraway. Throughout the game, you periodically swap between the two several times between story beats. While today I'm mostly going to focus on the real world and things that take place in Faraway, the split between these two places will be mentioned a few times. With all the background out of the way, we can start taking a closer look at Faraway Town as a setting. On the surface, it seems like a pretty typical American suburban town, with lines of houses that all look near identical, but under the surface it also has this dog. One of the most important parts of this setting is its normality. While even the most standard towns in games like Pokemon have some landmarks, Faraway lacks anything beyond a park, a shopping center, and a church. Most houses look the same and require you to remember things like colors or what cars are outside to differentiate one from another. This extreme normalcy, while seeming like a bad thing, I think really enhances two important themes in the game. For one, I mentioned earlier that contrasting themes is one of the strong points of Omori, and Faraway does an excellent job of that. The dream world of Headspace is so full of sounds, colors, things to see, and wacky characters. While in Faraway, you literally use descriptors like fashionable mom or thick eyebrows to tell one person apart from another. In fact, when you first leave your house and go outside into Faraway proper, this is all you can hear. While I initially thought this lack of music during your first few moments here was a bug, I think it's a really smart world building decision, really showing the player that this isn't the fun, bombastic world you're used to, it's the real world. And to segue to another important aspect of the real world, I don't use the term real there just to separate the dream and the real world, but also to emphasize that this world feels real. And it doesn't achieve that realism through ray tracing or by using 40 terabits per megaflock to render a blade of grass, but instead through tactful and smart world building. While there is the initial silence and sounds of cars passing by that I just mentioned, later in your adventures in Faraway, a main outdoors theme does play, and give it a short listen, it's important. I've heard a lot of happy town themes in games before, but I think Finding Shapes in the Clouds is easily one of the most definitive town themes I've ever heard. I'm not a music pro, so I wouldn't be able to deduce specifics, but everything about this song, from its carefree nature to echoey high notes, perfectly encapsulates the feeling of taking a walk with some friends on a bright sunny day. The other themes here, like those that play in shops or at the park, also have similar vibes. Even most of the few battles that take place here aren't accompanied by grand or exciting themes like the Dream World, but rather this. It's the theme of some goofball kids duking it out in a parking lot, perfectly fitting. And another quick note here on the battles, the backgrounds here are so well done. Completely standard photos of places around a small town, edited to be a bit more pixely and contrasty. It really helps with that small town feeling. All of these elements come together, the lack of landmarks, sound design, background imagery, everything about the setting of Faraway feels perfectly normal. Not in a boring way, but in a believable and real way that makes it seem like an actual place. For anyone who might have grown up in a smaller town or community like this one, it's likely this setting will feel familiar in a way that not many games can accomplish. Easily what sells the setting more than anything else though is its contrast to Headspace. Remember, you first start the game there, and aside from a brief stint with nightmares in the real world, you'll spend a good while before getting out into Faraway proper, and the way you're first introduced to it is just perfect. Before I start my perfectly timed segue into discussing the characters of the game, I first want to talk about this scene here. After waking up from Headspace for the second time, we find that it's daytime in the real world, no more spookies running about. Not only that, but we hear knocking on the door and it turns out to be Kel himself, one of the characters in our main group in Headspace. This little panning cutscene here is easily one of the most important in the game, and is also really important to the theming of this video. All of the abstractly colored characters, vivid imagery, everything we've seen in Headspace up to this point completely sets up this scene to be as daunting as it is. Normally, a friendly face at the door is simple and nice to see, but here we're greeted to a clearly aged Kel. Not only that, but fully colored with a new outfit and all. I'll talk a lot more about the importance of this contrast later, but first we'll talk about this guy. Kel is one of the 4 main members in your party in Headspace, and the first person you meet and hang out with in Faraway. He's considered the goofball of the group, always smiling and full of energy, ready to either help out his friends or get himself in trouble while goofing off. This cutscene here, as I've mentioned, is the first time you're introduced to him. And apparently it's the first time Sonny's left his house in a very long time, so he doesn't know quite how to react. After a bit though, you end up exploring Faraway with him, going on little quests and so on. Eventually you make it to the park and find Basil, another main character who's being harassed by a group of kids, including Aubrey. I don't even need to say much to make it clear that something has happened between here and here. With Kel looking as older as he did when we first saw him in the real world, it was obvious that a lot of time has passed, but now seeing Aubrey like this, it's clear that not only is this many years later, but that a lot of things have transpired during that time, and it seems to have taken a toll on her. After some fighting words are thrown around, we end up in an actual fight with Aubrey. Fortunately, just like in Headspace, we have some moves at our disposal, so just throw out the usual and... On top of everything else thus far, this moment makes it clear that the distinction between Faraway and Headspace isn't just for show. Turns out attacking someone with a knife does a little more than a few points of damage. Maybe a little silly to point out when Aubrey has a literal bat with nails sticking out of it, but I digress. Because of all this, talking about Aubrey's personality is actually pretty tough. In Headspace, she's a go-getter with a strong attitude and an even stronger attack stat. While she gets in little arguments with Kel here and there, she's generally pretty cheerful. Contrast that with Aubrey in the present though, and it's clear things have changed. She seems much more aggressive, even bullying Basil as I mentioned earlier, one of her former friends. Finally, after quite a while longer, we eventually meet Hero in the real world. In Headspace, he played the role of the mediator in the group, helping keep everyone friendly, taking care of them with healing items and cooking, and being an overall role model to each and every human being. And it turns out that in the real world, he's just the same. Maybe a bit more mellowed out, but otherwise he's still just as friendly. Basil and Marie are 2 other characters that play a major role in the game, but they're less relevant to the point of this video and are much harder to talk about without going into spoilers, so I'll leave them for now. All of the main characters, while very unique, are a lot like people you might know in real life. Even if the story they inhabit is a bit more extreme than our day-to-day lives, their motivations and personalities are as understandable as they are likable. While calling a character realistic and likable seems like a pretty bland statement to make, Omori's main cast having these 2 traits is particularly important when it comes to today's video. When characters are enjoyable, we want to see them more. We're interested in their past, who they're friends with, and their own aspirations and worries. And when characters are made believable on top of that, those traits turn from mere bullet points into ideas and feelings that we can relate to, things we've felt ourselves, and most importantly, they're longing for the past, the nostalgia that we all feel. Nostalgia as a feeling is something almost everybody watching this video has a strong connection to, especially in the modern day where many of us are left with a lot of time to think about things and what we want. We can't help but want to go back to the simpler times, when you didn't have to worry about much besides where you were going later that day, winning a game of cards, or having a fear of bugs or something. Those simpler times can't help but constantly pull us in. Omori doesn't only tackle the ideas of nostalgia head first, but it does so with both a setting and characters that aren't just enjoyable, they're relatable. The reason I spend so much time going into depth on both of these elements is to show that making a theme hit the player hard isn't just about talking about something. It's about getting the player invested, making them love the world, its characters, and relate to both on a level that makes us not only reflect on the feelings of the game's characters, but our own feelings. Headspace as a whole exists as a kind of metaphor. Almost the entirety of it seems incredibly childlike to a fault, and this isn't without reason. We've already established that the main cast here is much younger than they are in the present, meaning this whole world isn't a representation of Sunny's world as it is, but rather as it used to be. Back when all of his friends would hang out all the time, look at the photo album together, make new memories, go on adventures. These are things that he desperately misses and wishes he could go back to, using Headspace as a coping mechanism. Myself, and I'm sure many of you can remember a time when you were a kid, making up stories in your head with people you knew and the characters you loved, going on fun adventures with them, taking down bad guys, and most importantly, being without a care in the world. Headspace is this idea taken to the extreme, going from something fun to think about as a kid to a desperate attempt to escape the worries of the real world, and to forget what made this beloved group of friends split up as they have. While Headspace is an important metaphor for nostalgia in itself, its primary importance, I believe, is the contrast to the real world, Faraway Town. The first time you see Kel, the silence of the town and the sounds of the cars going by, part of the reason Headspace is as important as it is to make these seemingly normal events feel uncomfortable, different, and unfun in comparison to the world inside your head, the days you want to go back to. And not only do you see how Sunny's been affected by things, but his friends as well. Seeing the ways the other main characters cope with reality and how they've dealt with their group splitting apart isn't just impactful, it's relatable. The main point I wanted to get across here is that even if our situations probably aren't the same as the characters in-game, we feel the same sense of nostalgia that they do. We think of our own friend groups, our own lives, and wow, now we're getting a bit too deep, but I think you get my point. Omori is a brilliant game to play if these themes at all appeal to you, and I'm sure you'll get what I mean if you give it a play yourself. Beyond that, it also has loads of other great elements. The primary plot of the story, which I hardly got into here, a simple but still innovating RPG battle system, a fantastic soundtrack, the list goes on. If anything I've talked about today has piqued your interest, I really recommend giving Omori a shot. 20 bones sounds like a lot for an RPG Maker game, but trust me, Omori is a very beefy game, with way more than enough content to justify its price point. A playthrough can easily take more than 30 hours if you don't rush, and I'm sure it'll be an experience you remember for a long time.